I think we can start. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It is a great pleasure for me to welcome you to our conference on behalf of the media program Southeast Europe of the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. You usually see me in my capacity as director of the Adenauer Foundation for Bulgaria, but at the moment we have a vacancy. We will get a new director of the media program in October, which means that I have to be interim director until October. So at the moment I have two jobs. Well, better two jobs than none. I wish to express my profound thanks to our partner, the Sofia Security Forum, and its president, Mr. Jordan Bosilov. Thank you, Jordan. I'm very grateful for the excellent cooperation that we enjoyed when co-organizing this event. And I'm very happy that Monika Panayotova has joined us today, Deputy Minister for the Bulgarian Presidency of the Council of the EU. I have not seen her as relaxed during this last 6 months as I see her today, which is more than understandable, but I can say congratulations. I think Bulgaria did a great job. Much has been achieved. I will talk about this more in detail a bit later. Ladies and gentlemen, today we will talk about the role of the media on the path of the Western Balkans towards Europe. We will talk about information and disinformation. As I already said, the Bulgarian presidency of the EU Council ended only a few days ago. I consider this presidency a big success, not only because of the excellent organization of the conferences and meetings. Bulgaria was an honest broker, an independent arbitrator, and a facilitator of legislative discussions in the EU. But Bulgaria was also a policymaker. It shaped the agenda, and one main objective of the Bulgarian presidency was to draw the attention of the EU to the Western Balkans, and this goal was achieved. Congratulations once again. In the Sofia Declaration, passed on the 17th of May this year, the EU reaffirms its unequivocal support for the European perspective of the Western Balkans. I quote from the document: "The EU welcomes the Western Balkans partners' commitment to the primacy of democracy and the rule of law, especially the fight against corruption and organized crime, good governance, as well as for human rights and rights of persons belonging to minorities. Their effective implementation of reforms rests on these foundations. Civil society and independent media play a crucial role in the process of democratization." End of quote. So, the media play a crucial role. The EU is conscious of the outstanding role that media play in creating and shaping of public opinion and strengthening of society. As the fourth pillar of democracy, along with legislature, executive and judiciary, media of today have an embracing role to act against the injustice, misdeeds and partiality of our societies. Media act as watchdog to protect public interest against malpractice and create public awareness. They must release, determine and confront facts if they want to act responsibly. This huge impact on society must go hand in hand with the preparedness of media representatives to accept the responsibility for everything they present to the public. Journalists must be driven by clear ethical standards. It is clear that only independent media can perform this role. Media independence means more than the absence of censorship. We know about the problems that exist in this regard, and I'm sure you will discuss them during this conference. While the journalists that are here today belong to those who want to work in line with proper ethical standards, there are others that never had the intent to do so. They deliberately disseminate lies, or fake news. It has also become fashionable to call them alternative facts. They use hate speech to divide society. They threaten other journalists. Some of them do it out of conviction. Most of them do it for money. And for those standing behind them, money is no problem. Their overall objective is not to inform the public, but to manipulate and mislead it. They've used the freedom that liberal democracy guarantees to undermine and trying to destroy it. The Konrad Adenauer Foundation stands for democracy, the protection of human and minority rights, and the rule of law. We have to accept that the concept of liberal democracy is challenged by authoritarianism, populism. It is challenged by demagogues and autocrats who know how to use the media, and especially the social media. We carefully analyze how they work, and we develop counter-strategies. We do this because we want that democracy, the protection of human and minority rights, and the rule of law prevail. I know that you share these values. This is why we support you, and why we are so grateful for your difficult and challenging work. I thank you for joining us today. I hope we will have an effective, successful, and productive conference. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Torsten. Ваши превъзходителства, уважаеми народни представители, дами и господа, за мен е изключително удоволствие да ви приветствам като председател на Софийски форум за сигурност на днешната конференция, която е част от един по-голям проект, който реализираме с фондация Конрад Аденауер. Проект, който цели да анализира медийната ситуация в балканските страни, най-вече от гледна точка на тяхното желание за бъдещо членство в НАТО и в Европейския съюз. Казвайки, че днешната конференция е плод на ползотворното сътрудничество с фондация Конрад Аденауер, с която имаме изключително ползотворни и практически ориентирани проекти. И аз искам да благодаря специално на Торстен Гайслер за неговата подкрепа и за работата, която осъществява и чрез бюрото на Конрад Аденауер в България, и чрез медийната програма за Югоизточна Европа. Днешната конференция е част от един по-голям проект, който цели да анализира медийната среда в страните от Западните Балкани, да определи кои са факторите, които влияят, да набележи най-вече мерки, които да подобрят информационната среда на Балканите. Това не е едно просто събитие, не е обикновен анализ. Ние целим да дадем нашия принос чрез предложения за политики, чрез предложения, които ще бъдат изпратени на различните държави, но също така на НАТО и Европейския съюз, тъй като освен, че е проблем за отделните страни, дезинформацията, фалшивите новини, те са един доста по-голям проблем, което ще покаже и днесната конференция с участието на различните наши лектори. Аз бих искал да благодаря още на господин Торстен Гайслер и за подкрепата за други инициативи, които правим съвместно, а именно Лятната академия за млади лидери, която ще се проведе съвсем скоро, и аз искам да призова младите хора да кандидатстват. А тази академия цели да създаде именно отношение на лидерство. Нещо, което мисля, че в съвременна Европа много липсва. Без лидерски решения не могат да се намерят подходи за решаване на проблемите, пред които сме изправени. Темата не е избрана случайно. Темата е фокусирана върху Балканите. И това е един своеобразен принос към усилията на България чрез българското европредседателство да постави въпроса за европейското бъдеще на Балканите. И много искам тази тема да продължи. Мисля, че ще бъде най-голямата грешка, ако с края на българското председателство темата за Западните Балкани изчезне от дневния ред, или пък скоростта, която беше набрана, инерцията, бъде убита. Аз искам да ви кажа, че освен лекторите, които ще видите и ще чуете на тази сесия, в предишната сесия имахме представители от всичките 6 балкански страни. Това е Нирвана Делио, която е от Албания, изследовател в Европейското движение на Албания. Дамян Малбашич от Белград, сръбски анализатор. Момчило Радулович, президент на Европейското движение в Черна гора. Драган Секуловски, който е изпълнителен директор на Асоциацията на журналистите в Северна Македония. Дамир Агович, който е изследовател в Глобал аналитика в Босна и Херцеговина, и Виган Короли, който е преподавател в университета в Прищина. Тоест, виждате, ние имаме изключително добре подбрани анализатори, лектори. Така че аз бих искал да ви насърча, освен че ще може да задавате въпроси към лекторите в следващия панел, също така да отправяте вашите въпроси и към нашите гости и участници в този проект от страните от Западните Балкани. Много неща бяха казани на сутрешната сесия, бяха споделени различни оценки и виждания. Според нас проблемите, които стоят пред Западните Балкани в информационната среда, в медийния сектор, имат много общи черти, но също така са и много различни. Нашия проект ще приключи с публикация, базирана на дискусиите, които имахме днес и които ще имаме в бъдеще, така че всеки един от вас ще може да се запознае с анализите и с предложенията, които ние ще формулираме.
I will use both the English and Bulgarian. I will start in Bulgarian, then I will follow the principle of multilingualism for the most of participants because you're not natives in Bulgarian. Първо бих искала да благодаря от името на Министерство на българското председателство, на Софийския форум за сигурност и на фондация Конрад Аденауер за възможността да споделя с вас резултатите от работата на първото българско председателство на Съвета на Европейския съюз в контекста на изключително важната тема, която е предмет на разглеждане днес и която поставяте, а именно евроатлантическия път на Западните Балкани и ключовата роля на медиите и демократичния дебат. Бих искала изключително много да благодаря и на Софийския форум в лицето на господин Божилов, и на фондация Конрад Аденауер в лицето на господин Гайслер, и на всички присъстващи представители на гражданското общество, на парламентарното измерение на българското председателство, защото нашата цел от ден първи бе да реализираме отворено към гражданите председателство, в което всички активно да вземат участие и всъщност без изключително добавената интелектуална стойност чрез дискусиите, които проведохме в процеса на подготовка на българското председателство, програмата на българското председателство и резултатите, които в последствие в нейното изпълнение постигнахме, биха били невъзможни без прекия контакт, който имахме именно с представителите на неправителствения сектор, академичните среди, бизнеса, всички млади хора, които активно се развиват, обучават и реализират в сферата на европейските науки, дипломацията и международните отношения. Така че наистина благодаря за възможността да изкажа благодарност към всички вас днес, когато вече щафетата е предадена на колегите от Австрия. Благодаря и на техни превъзходителства, че бяха плътно с нас по време на целия процес, защото това е гаранция за една демократична легитимност на всичко, което правиме в изпълнение на целите на европейския дневен ред. В своето изложение днес ще се фокусирам върху две основни точки. Първо, постигнатото по време на българското председателство от гледна точка на европейската перспектива и свързаност на Западните Балкани. И второ, какви са ключовите сфери на дейност с цел утвърждаване именно на европейските ценности и противопоставяне на явленията като дезинформация и пропагандата. And now I will switch to the language of Shakespeare because I think it will be easier for you. Regarding the first point of my intervention, the European perspective and connectivity of the Western Balkans was the specific priority of the Bulgarian presidency, and actually the one our presidency will be remembered for. Our ambition when setting this priority was to motivate our partners in the region to continue their positive transformations, because actually the European perspective remains the strongest stimulus for reforms for the countries of the Western Balkans. The European Union is the biggest donor, main trading partner and key investor in the Western Balkans, and therefore it is of key importance to be able to communicate effectively its positive role for the development of the region and the added value of its support. The last several months actually have signaled a transition to a new stage in the development of the Western Balkans that will lead the region on its European path. So let me just mention the positive signal which was sent by the signing of the Treaty for Friendship and Good Neighborly Relations and Cooperation between Sofia and Skopje, which was defined by the European Union institutions as an inspiration for the whole region. Furthermore, in the past months, historical political efforts were made by Skopje and Athens for solving a decades-long name issue and finding common ground for developing good neighborly relations between the two countries. So good neighborly relations and regional cooperation play a vital role in strengthening the stability and prosperity of our region. And the European Union Western Balkans Summit on the 17th of May this year was a historical event considering the fact that the last summit of such kind took place already 15 years ago. The summit was a culmination of the long-standing efforts of the Bulgarian government and diplomacy in three key dimensions. The first one was related to the fact to bring the European perspective back on the European Union agenda. The second one was about formulating a priority with clear content and applicability. And the third one was about creating preconditions for constructive dialogue between the European Union and the Western Balkans partners, and also among the six Western Balkans countries themselves. In this regard, the summit gave a strong signal of the shared commitment to the European values and principles, and also of the engagement of the European Union itself to support the region's political, economic, and social transformations. So I'm pretty sure that in the future, when talking about the European perspective and the connectivity of the Western Balkans, we will refer to the Sofia Declaration and the Sofia Priority Agenda, which provide concrete dimensions to the process of European perspective and connectivity through specific projects and initiatives. In the Sofia Priority Agenda, a wide range of new initiatives actually are included, aiming to give a decisive impulse to develop digital connectivity, energy, infrastructural, transport, educational connectivity, and also connectivity in terms of the youth policy. So the annex is based strongly on the European Commission strategy for the region, published in February this year, with an inclusive character and delivering a message for credible enlargement perspective. So we place equal focus both on the European perspective of the Western Balkans and also on the connectivity. One is not a substitute for the other. On the contrary, developing ties between the countries, business, and the citizens of the Western Balkans and the European Union is actually the main instrument for positive transformations and for promotion of the democratic agenda in the region. Physical and human connectivity through concrete and visible projects in the Sofia Priority Agenda will contribute in the future to the development of the citizens' European identity. So the summit successfully achieved its three main objectives. The first one, to reaffirm the European perspective of the region. The second, to launch concrete and visible initiatives in order to improve the physical and human connectivity. And the third one, to address how to better engage together on shared challenges such as security and migration. As a result of this positive dynamic in the region, at the end of June, the Council, more specifically the General Affairs Council of the European Union, set out the path towards opening of accession negotiations with two Western Balkans countries, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia and Albania, in June 2019. It is just an abstract from the conclusions of the Council. So that's why I'm using the official name of beautiful Macedonia, like we are used now to say. So this was an important decision by which the member states have given a clear signal that we value the important decisions by which the member states have given a clear signal that we value the efforts to reform and foster reconciliation and good neighborly relations. As a presidency, we are really proud about this great achievement of our diplomacy, of our teams, of our government at the end of our term. The European Union and the Western Balkans partners share many security challenges that demand coordinated individual and collective actions. So when we work together, we are able to respond to these challenges effectively. Therefore, it's very important to support the security, capacity building, and resilience in the Western Balkans. The alignment with the common foreign and security policy positions by candidate and potential candidate countries is an important condition and prerequisite for better tackling the security challenges in the region. So this point is addressed by the Sofia Declaration, which underlines that the European Union welcomes the contribution of the Western Balkans partners to its common foreign and security policy and expects deepening of the cooperation in the area of joint strategic interests. Regarding the second point of my intervention related to the promotion of European values and fighting against the propaganda and disinformation, I would like to outline three important fields of action. Firstly, the key role of education and educational connectivity for the development of democratic resilience, media literacy, and critical thinking. It is important to focus our efforts particularly on youth, as they are actually the future of Europe and the Western Balkans in particular. You know that the new technologies completely change the way in which we assess and access information. So the internet has an enormous potential to improve pluralism in the media and freedom of expression, especially in regions undergoing democratic transformations. The young people are the so-called digital natives, and they perceive the world through digital technologies, the internet and social media. Therefore, they should be equipped with the right skills to critically analyze media content, to distinguish between fact and fiction, and to exercise their right of freedom of expression. In this regard, the Bulgarian presidency placed a special focus on digital skills and on the development of the so-called soft skills, such as critical and innovative thinking, which enable the development of media literacy, multicultural skills, and emotional intelligence. Digital and soft skills should go hand in hand because they contribute to developing responsible consumers and also creators of information. In the context of today's discussion, it's also worth mentioning that during the Bulgarian presidency, 11 European youth goals, which are part of the current strategy from the side of the European Commission youth strategy, those actually European youth goals were developed and presented in Sofia in April. And one of these goals is information and constructive dialogue, which reflects the understanding of young people that is crucial to be responsible as information users and creators. Secondly, the area of media and communication. Both the European Union and the Western Balkans partners should continue to invest efforts in strengthening the media environment, because media pluralism is a prerequisite for democracy and fundamental rights. And effective democracies need free, reliable, and pluralistic media. Thirdly, the EU is also active in countering disinformation in the region through developing more effective communication and promoting of EU policies towards the eastern neighborhood, and improving also its capacity to forecast, address, and respond to disinformation activities by external actors. An important step in this regard is the European Commission high-level expert group to counter fake news and to spread of disinformation online. This initiative, you know, was set up upon of the team of Commissioner Gabriel. The challenges of fake news and disinformation need to be addressed on many different levels, and a multi-stakeholders approach should be followed. This means engaging platforms, news media, research and civil society organizations in order to find the right solutions consistent with our fundamental principles of freedom of speech, freedom of information, human rights and liberties. The European Union has also developed an action plan on strategic communication and has launched the East Stratcom Task Force. So the European Union budget for this year, for 2018, strengthened the strategic communication capacity of the European External Action Service. Bulgaria was one of the member states which have underlined the importance of the work carried out by the task force. So we have repeatedly stressed that in order to achieve its tasks, the Stratcom should pursue a geographical balance in its work towards the Arab world, the Western Balkans, the Eastern Partnership, as well as by developing regional communication strategies. The Western Balkans deserve special focus in this regard, considering the vulnerability of the region towards certain security and stability risks. This vulnerability could be used by external factors to strengthen Euro-Atlantic skepticism, which could ultimately have a negative effect on the pace of European integration of the region. In this regard, the cooperation between NATO and the European Union should also cover the challenges of disinformation and other also hybrid activities, which are a focus of today's discussion. The EU and Western Balkans countries have important shared interests in fighting against this phenomenon through greater collaboration in resilience, cybersecurity, and strategic communication. The challenges of disinformation can only be addressed through cooperation and information exchange between the member states, EU institutions, and international organizations. So cooperation and coordination of all relevant actors at EU and national level, and strengthening cooperation between EU and NATO in the field of strategic communication is really crucial. Facing the common challenges leads to synergies between EU and NATO, including on the theater of the Western Balkans. So the Euro-Atlantic path of the Western Balkans should be considered, and we are expecting the signing of a new joint declaration by the President of the Commission, the President of the European Council, and the Secretary General of NATO in the margins of the July NATO summit, which will clearly restate the EU-NATO cooperation is mutually beneficial, and will call for further efforts to communicate these benefits to our publics. So, in conclusion, we strongly believe that connectivity plays a key role in promoting the European Union values and Euro-Atlantic values, and coping with the new forms of security threats such as propaganda, disinformation, and fake news. For this reason, it's great that today experts, civil society representatives, as well representatives of different institutions will engage with this topic. And such kind of discussions, I'm sure, will contribute greatly to raising public awareness of these challenges, and also to better inform and enrich the public debate. So I would like to wish success to your initiative and your project. And I will read with great interest the final publication at the end of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Panayotova. Indeed, it's very important to continue with our priorities, because integration is not something which has a particular date. It's a process. Okay, having said that, now I can probably invite our panelists. And I'll present just Mila Serafimova, who is a member of Sofia Security Forum. She is a coordinator of Media and Communication Program.
Интереса към нашата тема. Имаме и представители от сутрешната сесия, всички са тук. Така че след нашите 4 гости от тази сесия ще имате възможност да задавате въпроси към всички. Преминаваме към първия говорител по нашата тема, София Айзентраут, Policy Advisor в Мюнхенската конференция по сигурност. Could I ask you to introduce yourself with some more words before the beginning of the...
Okay. Yes, I'm Sofia Eisentraut, and I'm currently working for the Munich Security Conference as a policy advisor. However, a little disclaimer, I'm speaking here in my private capacity because I've been doing research on Russian disinformation before at different think tanks in Europe and the US, and especially at the German Marshall Fund in Washington, D.C. Yes. Am I starting? Or? Okay. Okay. Yes, so maybe to give you a bit of a background, I'm not an expert on individual Western Balkan countries, but I've been doing a lot of research on Russian disinformation more generally, also in Germany, in the heads up to the German elections last year. And I'm especially interested in the broader patterns of Russian propaganda and disinformation in the region, in the Western Balkans. And I would also like to highlight a few ways in which I think the European Union especially should and actually I think has to respond to Russian disinformation in the region. Yes, so first of all I would like to clarify that I really do think that the ultimate target of Russian disinformation in the region is not only individual countries in the Western Balkans and their relationship towards Russia, but it's also very much the European Union as such and the Western community. So disinformation and propaganda targeting the EU, meant to weaken the EU, meant to ensure that it's not further expanding, meant to ensure that NATO is not further expanding into what Russia considers its sphere of influence. And I think Russia does so both by direct and indirect means. Directly, in terms of it is really discrediting the EU and the West more broadly by reporting, by spreading disinformation, by spreading conspiracy theories and so on. But it's also doing indirect work with regard to weakening the EU and undermining future enlargement efforts. So most importantly, especially for the Western Balkans, I think it's that it's very active in fomenting inter-ethnic tensions, so trying to stir up lingering regional tensions, and that is of course not only troublesome for the countries involved, but also for the European Union as such, because this is our immediate neighborhood. Many of the countries are already part of the European Union, and if we only adopt a very realist and security-oriented perspective, the European Union cannot ignore this, because I mean we've seen in 2015 how important this region was to managing the refugee crisis, and there's no way to manage future crises if we do not have a stable environment, right? If these are stable partners in managing these kind of conflicts. We also do not want radicalization to happen in the region and worry about export of extremism. So I think it's even if we only focus on the very security aspects of our relationship to the immediate environment, immediate neighborhood, we cannot ignore what Russia is doing here. Russia is employing many tools for this purpose. But propaganda, fake news, disinformation is a very, very important part of this. There's a few examples I could give. For instance, I think the Serbian language program Sputnik Serbia that's promoting conspirational thinking about EU and US as imperialist powers that seek to destroy Serbian identity. That's not only meant to discredit the EU and the West, but it's also feeding, of course, nationalist Serbian sentiments, and is very worrisome in this regard. We also have Russia Beyond the Headlines, a free and free app that's available in 14 languages, and that also fosters very actively negative attitudes towards the West. I think it's really important for the EU to push back. I already said for which reasons, but I think there's two measures involved. One is directly confronting Russian propaganda, but the other is also reaching out much more actively to the region and re-engaging actually with the Western Balkans, which in some extent, or to some extent, has been neglected a lot by the EU in recent years. Confronting Russian propaganda, I think there were already a few measures mentioned earlier today. One is definitely exposing disinformation and fake news, and that can be done by supporting fact-checking initiatives, ideally local ones. There's also the Stratcom task force of the European External Action Service. That's not a local actor, but they're doing really important work. They have this website up, it's called EU versus Disinformation. That's really a great initiative. So far, if I'm still rightly informed, it's only available in Russian, English, and German. And I think it would make a lot of sense to have this kind of information also out there in languages that can actually be accessed by Western Balkan nations. But these kind of initiatives are important. Of course, what has already been stated, media literacy is probably the most sustainable way to counter disinformation in the long term, and that definitely has to start at very early ages in a child's education. More generally, of course, we have to support media freedom, because in an environment where freedom of press is not fully developed, of course, these countries and these societies are much more vulnerable to information operations by foreign powers. So this is something we have to take very serious. And I think what's also important is to make sure that Western media sources are more affordable, accessible, and that they're also more tailored, or much better tailored, to the concerns of local and regional constituencies, because so far it's just much more easy to access Russian news. Sputnik, for instance, the content of Sputnik is accessible free of charge. You can just republish it. As long as you credit Sputnik, you can use it. And of course, I mean, then for everyone, every journalist who cannot afford to cover every topic, it's really easy to just draw on these kind of sources. And if the pro-Western alternative is just not affordable or accessible, then then this is really troublesome. So these are the measures I would suggest in actively confronting Russian propaganda, but I think there's another really important aspect I already mentioned, and that's re-engaging with the Western Balkan nations, because I think the EU has to be so honest to admit that by actually neglecting the region quite a bit in recent years, it has actually helped Russia in many ways. It has actually helped Russia or Russian propaganda to fall on very fertile grounds, because it has created frustrations, disillusionment with the European Union, with the West in general, and of course this is fertile ground for propaganda. So we need to reach out much more actively to Western Balkan nations, make sure that they're not disillusioned with the European Union, and that they're not so easily targeted by Russian propaganda, and that Russia cannot so easily exploit all these frustrations. And this may have many dimensions. There's many ways to do this, but especially, or one especially important point is that the European Union needs to make its own activities much more visible. It needs to be much better at self-marketing, because it is a really important actor in the region. It's an important trade partner, it's an important investor, it's an important aid donor, much more active than Russia. But in the public perception of many nations of the Western Balkan, it's Russia that's more active. And there's this gap between perception and reality needs to be closed, and I think that's something where we can start with. I think we can also learn a bit from Russia in terms of Russia being really good at targeted assistance and very symbolic acts of assisting in the region. We've been to Belgrade last fall, and someone told us that Russians are, every now and then they just go to the countryside in Serbia and give out fire extinguishers to villages for their schools. And of course that immediately creates the impression, okay, Russia cares for us, cares for our security, Russia's here for us. And this is very low cost measure, of course, right? But it's very effective and very symbolic. And I think the European Union can learn from this. And I'm glad that the European Union usually thinks more sustainable and more long-term in its projects, but I think every now and then we need to think a bit more strategic and need to think a bit more about what's actually directly affecting people's lives and how we can also make use of these symbolic ways of helping out. And last but not least, I think we also need to be pressuring Western Balkan leaders a bit stronger to also fairly report on what the European Union is doing in their countries as compared to Russia, because there's different motives involved, but one has to admit that Western Balkan leaders very often also do not fairly report. They sometimes misrepresent how much the European Union is doing and represent Russia as the much more active actor. And I think we cannot accept this, and we need to put more pressure for fair reporting. Thanks.
It's really this famous strategic communication proverb that the perception is reality. I think this is a very important part of your presentation, this gap between perception and reality. So this is one interesting topic for our further discussion. And now I would like to give the floor to Sandra Svetuka. She is a representative of NATO Strategic Communication Center. They have really very interesting researches, and she will present part of their findings on the topic of our conference.
Good afternoon. Yes, as I was introduced, I come from the NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence, which is, I would say, more like an organization or think tank established in 2014 to analyze different aspects on how NATO can do better in strategic communication. So, and we have done a lot of studies on how hostile influence is used and in different formats and different regions. And for example, just for your information, some of the studies like Russia's footprints in the Nordic Baltic region, where we try to see what different influence mechanisms were used and are still used in different countries around Nordic region and Baltic states. We have also looked in Moldovan information environment. We also look at digital space, and especially different information and disinformation activities happening there, as well as one of our recent products, which is like an ongoing and regular product, is robot trolling, about social bots spreading information and misinformation in regards to NATO presence in the Baltic region. All of our studies are public. These are just one small part of them. You can all of them find in our webpage and read through and use the findings expressed there. When talking about the problem of disinformation, I really share this statement by Sofia expressed before about that we should start with the problem of vulnerability of each country. Each country has it. Either it's ethnic or religious tensions, or it's economic dependency, or it's some kind of historical memories or unsolved issues. By identifying these vulnerabilities and tailoring messages to target them, you can achieve a lot of very, very good results in weakening another state. And this is why I think a lot of mechanisms or influence mechanisms which can be applied for one region can be applied also for other regions. Of course, looking at the specific country-specific issues. We have been monitoring. After the NATO Warsaw Summit, NATO decided to send its troops to eastern border of NATO in the Baltic states and Poland to strengthen its presence there in response to emerging threats coming from east. And since then we have monitored the information space in these four countries and have identified certain narratives which has been used against NATO. And have seen also some fluctuations, how different narratives has changed, how many times they have used in response to some activities on the ground. Like, for example, in reaction to big NATO exercise, you have a huge peak up in one of the narratives. In reaction to statements by NATO Gen-Sec Stoltenberg, you can see another peak. We have also monitored social media and still do that, and you can find these studies on our webpage. And we have noticed that, yes, there have been a big increase on bots spreading disinformation and anti-NATO messages, especially in Russian information space. But they have, the social bots, the number of social bots have recently decreased. However, anonymous accounts, the number of anonymous accounts have increased. So basically there are a lot of efforts already done by social media companies like Twitter and Facebook to decrease the number of automated accounts. However, the ones who are creating these accounts, they have decided that let's be more elaborate and let's humanize these accounts and continue spreading the anti-NATO narratives there. After monitoring the information stays in the Baltic states and Poland, we have decided to come up with another project where we could analyze and compare what is happening in the Baltic states and Poland during the NATO enhanced forward presence missions, and compare it to what kind of anti-NATO narratives can be identified in the Western Balkans. In this particular project, we are looking only of NATO members. However, there is potential to look also for other countries in the Western Balkans. And the methodology of the project is to look at the country reports to see what kind of vulnerabilities the countries have, what is the media space, what are the media consumption habits, and to collect also social media data to see what kind of messages are distributed there. I have to say that when we speak about aims of disinformation, or if we talk about Russia's disinformation activities, I should say that one of the aims is, if we compare Baltics, Poland, and Balkans, in Baltics, Poland, the aim would be to damage countries' reputation and weaken ties with NATO. However, on the Balkans, the aim is similar, but I would say it's more like about hampering integration into Euro-Atlantic institutions. And however, these two strategic aims perhaps differ a bit. I think the effects which they try to create are quite similar. The effects would be to create ambiguity, to muddle the waters, so that it's unclear what kind of messages are there and activities, and what to do about that. Exploit already existing tensions in society and try to facilitate them, as well as exploit states' vulnerabilities and weaken its ability to cope with that or to act, and as well as weaken trust in state institutions and democracy in general. And the narratives which you can see on the screen right now, I tried to put them as a comparison. And the ones which you see in red are the ones which you can see some similarities. Of course, there are country-specific narratives for each country, but I just selected the most popular ones, and perhaps something is also missing. You cannot always, cover everything. But as you can see, most of the narratives actually are quite similar and following the general line. The same we can also say about the tactics and channels used for spreading these narratives. And I think Sofia already mentioned some of the cases and some of their tactics. Which is the use, at least in Baltic case, it's a use of joint language space, and we can also say about similar things about many countries in Western Balkans, about having ethnic groups or even the countries which have a command of Serbian language and which can read and understand content created in Serbian language. The same applies also for Russian-speaking populations in the Baltics and in other previous Soviet Union countries. Networks of spreading the message in the networks of media, traditional media, fringe media, blogs, social media groups, and this message is spread in a very, very fast mode. And this is nothing unique only to one or another region. It is happening also, it has been noticed also in the networks in trying to influence US elections, and perhaps it is happening also all over the world. Using social media accounts, already mentioned about anonymous fake accounts, and also the real public opinion leaders who are sharing the content. Using populist voices in local countries and so-called useful idiots, politicians or local leaders who share anti-NATO narratives, and they think that they really share their anti-Western stances or anti-liberal, anti-democratic stances. However, they not always understand that their opinions and their influence can be used for an actor and for their needs. Of course, I think it was also mentioned before, use of non-governmental organizations, governmental organizations, even religious leaders, as it was identified in Montenegro, for example, and also in other countries where religious communities play a central role. I will just show you interesting case study from my country, from Latvia, how eyewitness story which appeared on Facebook and which very much resonates about how NATO troops in Latvia misbehave and how badly they treat local people and local state. It's about eyewitness story which was firstly published on Facebook, where they found the US military food package in the woods together with other rubbish, and putting this particular package in the right context, they created the whole story. And it started with the eyewitness story in a Facebook group called Latvian Mushroom Pickers Club. Then it traveled to the other Facebook group, which is called Riga Cat Lovers Club. It was spread also through the other group, which is Dogs Lover Cat, Riga Dogs Lovers group. Later on, it was picked up by local Russian media, and already with the title that based on the Facebook, NATO troops behave like pigs. Then the same story traveled to Russian media, to Regnum portal. Then it came back again to Latvian Russian media, already in the larger context, where other stories were combined about NATO soldiers raping local ladies, about NATO soldiers being drunk and fighting with locals. Basically putting it in a bigger context that NATO is aggressor, and usually the troops, whenever they go, they misbehave and affect daily lives of the people. What we can do about that? I think you have seen a lot of good recommendations about improving media literacy, about debunking the fake facts, and you will hear more about more recommendations also during this conference. My suggestion would be a very practical one. I just called it preemptive action, which means you would start with identifying the vulnerability of each country. This is just an example. For example, historical memories about NATO involvement in Balkan wars. Then you identified what kind of narratives are used in connection to this vulnerability. And then you try to mitigate it with some clear recommendations. So in this case, it could be capacity building for providing alternative information, or for example, there is the narrative spread about how NATO bombs has caused increased numbers of cancer by using depleted uranium in their bombs. So, but on the other hand, there has been no research made to debunk this narrative and these false facts. So there are a number of activities you can take for each vulnerability and for each narratives, and prepare already timely to prevent them for happening. I will stop here. I'm sure there will be plenty of good recommendations also for other speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. It was very interesting research about this anti-NATO messaging in Baltic countries and in Balkan countries. Quite similar narratives, similar channels and tactics, which is really very interesting. And I want to tell you that all these researches are available on your website. Yes. So
this particular research is not available yet. It will be published in the end of this year. So we are in the middle phase of the project currently.
Yes. So then we will have chance to read in details this interesting comparison. Thank you. Now I will give the floor to Jesus Perez Triana, Analista de Seguridad y Defensa, our guest from Spain.
Well, yes, my name is Jesus Perez. I'm from Spain. I'm a security and defense analyst. My academic work deals mainly with the transformation of war. I'm the author of a book called Postmodern Wars. I have written about the Russian influence in the Mediterranean area. That is one of the areas of interest for Spain. I have written about that topic for the Spanish Navy Journal, for CIDO Barcelona, is one of the main think tanks in Spain. And I'm currently working, this is my main job now, as an intelligence analyst for a cybersecurity firm in Spain, using open source intelligence applied to social media to detect and to analyze threats and political risk. Of course, I want to thank you to the Sofia Security Forum and the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for the invitation. This is not my first time in Bulgaria. I was invited in late 2016. In that time, we were discussing the Russian influence in Europe, and I felt that time that I felt glad and relieved to be invited to discuss the topic, because in Spain was really overlooked. That changed in the last month. So this is a very hot topic in Spain, as we will see. And of course, my opinions today are my own, and are not the views of any of my employees, past or present. I talk about the Spanish Ministry of Defense and technology. Well, Spain is a very specific, unique case when talking about foreign interference. And the matter is that I think that being so unique, maybe the lessons I have taken, maybe of interest of you. The very first thing that we have to take in consideration is that the Spanish language has the second highest number of native speakers in the world. That means every major nation that tries to exert influence in the global arena has launched a Spanish-speaking news channel. We have Deutsche Welle from Germany in Spanish. We have France 24 in Spanish, but we have, of course, Russia Today, Sputnik International, a Spanish edition, and we have other many players that are unique to the Spanish-speaking world. For example, the Iranian Broadcasting Corporation launched a Spanish-speaking TV channel. And the curious information is that the leader of the third biggest party in Spain, Pablo Iglesias, leader of Podemos. Podemos means we can, was a party that was created after the economical crisis, after the crisis of the two-party system in Spain. Well, he's working for the Iranian TV channel. And he hosts a political talk show with a very clear agenda against NATO, very critical of the European Union. Then we have other players. We have Telesur. Telesur is a multinational TV channel launched by Hugo Chavez in 2005. It's founded by Venezuela, Cuba, Bolivia, Nicaragua. You mentioned all the key allies of Russia in Latin America. And we have another specific case, I think, in the Spanish-speaking world, and we have Lebanese and Syria Spanish-speaking media. We have Al-Manar. This is the Hezbollah TV channel. We have another ones from Lebanon, Syria. And I think that we have like two main reasons for this. First of all, is that you have a very big Lebanese and Syrian communities in Latin America. For example, you may know Shakira, the Colombian singer, Salma Hayek, the Mexican actors. Both have a paternal grandfather who came from Lebanon to Mexico and Colombia. But also you have Carlos Menem, who was a president for Argentina during the 90s. His family came from Syria. That's the case also from the former vice president of Venezuela, Tarek al-Aissami. Nowadays he's just a plain minister. So the second reason I found for those many Spanish-speaking media from Lebanon and Syria is they are trying to offer a point of view about the ongoing conflicts in the area to the Spanish-speaking world. And of course, they are trying to reach those communities, the Arab or the Syrian, Lebanese, Latino community, to raise support and to raise funds. Hezbollah has an influence and operative networks in Latin America. Previously, I mentioned that every major player in the global arena has a Spanish-speaking TV channel. The matter is, Well, everyone is trying to play in this game of influence. So what's the difference? What makes it special when we are always talking about Russia? Russia is the elephant in the room. Well, there is a very clear difference between, for example, public media like BBC from London, where you can find sometimes you can find a very critical point of view about its own country. That's not the case of Russia today. As a friend say, you can watch all the day Russia today, and at the very end of the day, you have no idea what's happening in Russia today. So this media, the Russian, the Iranian, this Telesur, this we call the Bolivarian axis in Latin America, are always playing the role of anti-establishment. Curiously, you have governments whose democratic credentials could be discussed, playing the role of being the rebels, being the anti-establishment. And you have, of course, these conspirational theories. You have even in the Spanish version of Russia Today stories about UFOs and alien bases in the USA. So the idea is not trying to present a reality about how's Russia, what's going on, but creating uncertainty and doubt. Yeah, the very core of the narrative of this media is don't trust your government, don't trust what Western governments are saying, don't trust establishment media. And so far, they have been quite successful in this, moving this agenda of critical point of view, reaching in Spain, for example, to the far left and to the far right. Nowadays, the main support to the Kremlin and the Russian point of view in geopolitics in Spain is based in and in the rest of Europe from the far left and the far right. So you have leaders of the Communist Party visiting Bashar al-Assad. You have very connections between also the far right, as I mentioned, to Russia, but also this axis, because at the very end you have like a triangle. You have the Russian media, you have the Iranian media, and you have the Telesur, and they are working together in a way that one piece of news here is quoted there, then edited, and you find that sometimes it's hard to find the real source, because they are quoting each other and they are working. I'm not trying to say, I'm not saying that they are working together, but they are keeping the same agenda and they are supporting each other in a way that it's very hard sometimes to find the very source of this, because beyond this very core of state media, you have many websites quoting and reproducing the information coming from these three outlets: Russia Today, Telesur, and Hispan TV. The matter is that you have the Twitter profiles, the blogs, the Facebook web pages. Even you have, for example, news aggregators. There are some websites where automatically you can reproduce headlines from Russia Today, Telesur, Hispan TV, working in a very automatic way. There's no human intervention there. And they are always presented with a very progressive agenda, sometimes from the very far right. The matter is that if you stop to think, the official ideology in Venezuela has no relation at all with the Islamic Republic of Iran, and there is apparently no relation with the political agenda of the Putin's Russia. But the very idea that gets together of these three government outlets are anti-NATO, anti-Western points of view everywhere. So, according to the Russian Today correspondent in Venezuela, Russia Today is a counterweight, an alternative to the transnational hegemonic media that have turned disinformation into a weapon of war. So they are saying that Western media are using disinformation. So the first challenge is how big is the influence of these media outlets? Because I think that you can take a real impression of how influenced are those media outlets in the Spanish-speaking world, just counting how many views has each video piece in YouTube, for example. Because I told you about this snowball effect that every piece of information is reproduced, copied and pasted in local outlets. So I think there is a task we have, or a job we have to do in Spain, is starting introducing metrics to the influence of these media outlets. So, what's the political agenda of Russia in Spain? The matter is that Spain is in the far corner of Europe. We are far away from the borders with Russia. Spain is strategically speaking is oriented to the Mediterranean Sea, to the Maghreb, North Africa, and to Western Africa. We are really worried about what's happening in Sahel region and Sahara. So until very recently, Spain had good, more or less good relations with Russia. We were getting inversion in the real estate market. We got tourists from Russia, and even the Russian Navy ships were stopping in the Spanish port. That was ended when the Russian fleet got into the Eastern Mediterranean to take part in the Syrian conflict. So the influence is quite limited when talking about just European Union, for example. Spanish public opinion is quite pro-European. We were so far away, we felt so far away for 40 years of dictatorship that the European Union, even after the economical crisis, is seen as something positive. Not because it's seen as a force of good, but at least the idea of Europa, belonging to Europe, is something we find positive. The other approach beside European Union is NATO, and this is another different game. There is a very specific anti-American bias in the Spanish public opinion, and you find that in the conservative right, in the Catholic conservative right, and you find that also in the progressive left. So there is the talking point about NATO. I think they reach the Russian talking points reach, and they are usually about how Spain is not a real full independent country because we are just following orders from Washington and Brussels. We are even harming ourselves because we had that Russian investment in Spain. We had tourists from Russia, and even with the agriculture sector was exporting. So the idea is we are just playing fool because we are harming ourselves, cutting good relations with Russia. For example, in the Skripal case, Spain expelled Russian diplomats, and the idea is, are we going to win anything with this? Are we just following orders? So from the Russian narrative, Spain was just taking orders, instructions set by the European Union and NATO. And the second approach is just that our partnership with Washington is dangerous. For example, Spain is hosting 4 American U.S. Navy destroyers that belong to the ballistic missile defense. And from the Russian narrative, we are becoming a target for the Russian missiles just for hosting these 4 destroyers. And even they are presenting the ballistic missile defense. The word here is defense, as a very aggressive move from Washington. And the last approach is a very specific topic, is the involvement of Spain in the European enhanced force projection in Latvia. Presenting again that Spain is behaving very aggressive against Russia when it's a country that we have no quarrels and conflicts with. So I think that the Russian narrative about internal politics, about the foreign Spanish politics, is quite limited. I think they have really worked, they have really promote their agenda when talking about international conflicts. The idea here is neutralizing the backlash about Russian involvement in places like Ukraine or Syria. So you have, I think that the number of news pieces about Ukraine and Syria are much bigger than pieces about what the Spanish government is doing with NATO or European Union. And there's a very I think it's one of the very few cases of disinformation operation that involved Ukraine was a guy called Carlos Sanchez, and he pretended in Twitter that he was an Ukrainian, or he was working as an Ukrainian air traffic controller, and he was a witness of what happened to the Malaysian flight MH17. He was interviewed in Russia Today, talking about how he was working in the air traffic control center in Kiev, how he witnessed everything, how he was taken away by Ukrainian military, and he was presented as a proof that Spanish government, mainstream government, are not telling the truth about what's happening in Ukraine. Even Putin praised in an interview with Oliver Stone a few years ago that one of the proof that there was something sketchy, there was something dark about the downing of the flight MH17 was what happened with that guy. The matter is that it made no sense at all. A Spanish guy working as an air traffic controller in Ukraine, it didn't make sense at all. But there were many people sharing this piece of information that, oh, this is insider information. This guy is telling what no one else is daring to tell. The matter is that Radio Free Europe researched about this guy and found he was living in Bucharest. He was sentenced in Spain for fraud. He was very far away from Ukraine, and something very, very low-brow, something that very stupid worked, because it always is playing the Russian narrative, always playing we are going to tell you what no one dares to tell. We are going to give you a piece of information that will make you feel that you are an insider. The another conflict that obviously Russia is promoting always a very specific narrative is Syria. And in this case, we have working the Russian narrative and the Lebanese and the Syrian narrative, even media, and it is working because we have several, I can remember at least 4 Spanish journalists were kidnapped in Syria. So the Spanish media stopped having reporters on the ground. So the Syrian and Russian narrative of what was going on Syria was quoting and using local sources, when all the reporting in Spain was from Turkey or from far away from Syria. So there is very alternative narrative about Syria, and the Islamic State is supported by the CIA, and this kind of narrative was spread quite much. Well, there is a topic. I told you that the situation in Spain has changed, and we have a very turning point, and that was the Catalonian crisis. It's it's a very complex topic I'm not going to get into, but the matter is that El País, the most prestigious and the biggest selling serious newspaper in Spain, published a report about the work of some bots, in Twitter bots, promoting links to Russia Today and links to news about the Catalonian crisis in Twitter. And this is my personal opinion. I think that the role of Russia in the Catalonian crisis is very minimal. I think this is not a major player, but this little piece of information about 4,800 bots working, promoting news from Russia Today about the Catalonian crisis was a wake-up call for the Spanish government. Only after the Catalonian crisis, the topic of the external influence in Spain was another matter of discussion. And it pushed the government to take measures about it. The first idea was really. Oh, sorry. So, well, I will finish. My conclusion. So, the first idea was that create a truth commission. Let's create a governmental commission to discuss what is a fake news. And, well, the reaction of journalists was that there was no way a government commission can decide what is fake news. So we have a very top-down solution. Another reaction was appointing a special ambassador for cyber warfare and hybrid warfare and taking part, joining the Center of Excellence for Hybrid Warfare in Helsinki. And the matter is that, well, and this is I think my personal lesson about this. The government, the Catalonia is a good example of how bad the government did about fake news and information. And the best practice was, or the best reaction was, when a group of volunteers decide to translate into French, English, Italian, German, and every language everyone knew, essays and information from Spanish to other. So there was a local group of volunteers fighting disinformation in the international sphere. And I think that is the lesson.
Do you think there is similarities with the Balkan countries?
The idea is that maybe the top-down, okay, let's create a commission, a governmental commission to deal with fake news. The perception is, okay, you have governments fighting other governments, but when the solution comes from civil society, the credibility of people say, no, this is not a government, this is people working from their heart to fight fake news. And I think that maybe it's not the case of Russian interference, but I think that this is a lesson. Civil society.
It's very interesting that I found a lot of similarities between the process you described in Spain and Latin America, and as well Baltic countries and the Balkan countries. It's very interesting that the same trends, of course we have national specifics, but generally speaking, for me it was very interesting to make this comparison. And in the end, maybe internet environment is the leading force which really makes us citizens of this global village, because these similar trends in different nations we can explain with this online communication, which is make us part of this global village. So we have already Balkans, Baltic states, Spain, Latin America, and I want to give now the floor to our colleague Dimitar Vatsov, who will speak a little bit more about Bulgaria and maybe the same process in Bulgaria. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me at this interesting forum. I am a university professor in New Bulgarian University, but here I am as president of the Human and Social Studies Foundation, Sofia. This foundation realizes a media monitoring of nearly the whole Bulgarian web space on all the media that are online or presented online in the last 2 years, and we are measuring and analyzing the propaganda messages in them, of the populist propaganda and of the Russian propaganda in particular. And now I will make only 3 synoptic points about the Russian propaganda. These points are made on the basis of our long-time study. And these 3 points concern 3 different levels of the Russian propaganda: the level of the narratives, the level of the channels of dissemination, and third, the level of the propaganda social impact. So my tasks were made easier by the statements of the previous speakers, and I will focus first on this: that there are a number of studies in the last year show that there is a set of stable, ready-to-cook propaganda narratives that are used with small variation by the Russian and pro-Russian media everywhere. These narratives was described to some extent by all the speakers, focused extremely well by Sanda and by NATO Stratcom. but I will repeat few of them. Russia is fighting against the hegemony of the West for a multi-power world. NATO is a threat to Russia. Refugees and migrants are a threat for the European peoples, and EU is helpless to stop them. Brussels dictates nearly everything in the member states and expropriates the people's sovereignty, and so on. But the use of those narratives is not one and the same in all the times. They're applied with some context sensitivity. As a recent study quoted by Sanda of NATO Stratcom in Riga, sorry for a moment, their studies show that only few of these narratives are used, for example, in the Nordic countries, only 2 of them. The first one is that NATO is a threat to Russia, and the second one is that migrants are a threat to the social security system. But some additional narratives are added in the case with the Baltic region. For example, the propaganda thesis that there is a discrimination of the Russian-speaking minorities in these countries. On the Balkans, and especially in Bulgaria, some other narratives are added to this main stable set. The Bulgarians should be eternally grateful to Russia for their national liberation, for their liberation from fascism, from their material prosperity and social security due to the Soviets, but lost in post-Soviet times, and so on. It is very difficult to counter those narratives only from inside on a national level, because they rely on and penetrate in already existing social and cultural stereotypes. Only a comparative study, for me, an exemplar study is this on the Nordic and Baltic region of NATO Stratcom. Only a comparative study can shed light on them and reveal that there are propaganda narratives used entirely instrumentally in different contexts with slight or without any touch to the truth. I hope that we will manage to organize such a comparative study for the Balkans. Second, the channels of dissemination. The Russian propaganda has limited direct impact, limited mainly on the Russian-speaking populations that follow the Kremlin-controlled TV media and outlets. RT and Sputnik are far from global coverage. Their audience is small, measured on the global scale. Of course, careful investigations can show that some local actors, outlets and individuals systematically disseminate the Russian propaganda narratives. They are useful idiots, right or not. Yes, but there are only few in Bulgaria and at other places. So the direct Russian propaganda is not omnipotent. It doesn't have real global coverage. However, our study, the HSSF study on the Bulgarian media, reveals that the Russian propaganda narratives have another power. Very often local actors borrow the Russian propaganda package and use it for their own economic and or political purposes, even in anti-Russian directions sometimes. Here we can see the case of the Poland. This is so because the Russian propaganda narratives, generally speaking, are an ideal tool for a state capture. Blaming Brussels for its dictate over the national politics and economics is a perfect tool to resist international monitoring and control. Appealing to the people's sovereignty, inciting to the migrants, and claiming for immediate strong leadership. All these are perfect tools to go beyond the internal separation of powers and beyond all checks and balances inscribed into the national institutions. And finally, blaming the NGOs, the independent media and pro-Western politicians to be Sorosoids and grand spongers, in fact foreign agents, this is again an ideal tool to block every civic resistance from inside. No surprise, but these are the most used quasi-Russian narratives in Bulgaria in the last 5 years. We could say that the Russian oligarchy is something like a role model for many wannabe local oligarchs. Probably all this can be found in each Western Balkan country too, I could guess. We call these fusions and the mutual fertilizations between the Russian propaganda and the local populisms, populist propaganda in general. The new populist propaganda front, where the local populists and oligarchs and the Russian secret services and official media form a specific symbiosis, is the real danger for Bulgaria, for the Balkans, but also for every single country in Europe, as Brexit has already shown, or as the Catalonia case. And finally, social impact. After 2 representative surveys realized together with Alpha Research Agency, we can conclude the populist propaganda has real impact only on the surface of the individual attitudes, respectively on the surface of the public opinion. If asked in general without specification, nearly 2/3 of the Bulgarian population support the propaganda statement that Brussels dictates the national politics. But if the respondents are confronted with concrete alternatives, the picture changes dramatically. Ask whether it's better to live, to work, to educate your children, or which one is the best geopolitical choice for Bulgaria. Between 70 and 90% of the Bulgarians prefer EU than every other alternative. Russia is split with less than 2% in these answers. Propaganda can be easily unmasked when it is confronted with the practical life choices and with the practical knowledge of the citizens. Thank you very much.
Благодаря много за тази и гледна точка и към нашата реалност. Наистина много интересен поглед и към всички регионални подходи. Интересно е, че имаме вече и данните за България. Аз бих искала, преди да минем към дискусията, да дам думата на Ирина Новакова, която виждам и която има много така значим опит, както с Европейския съюз, така и с НАТО. Ще се радвам, ако чуем и нейното мнение, преди да започнем дискусията.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and very nice to meet you all. My name is Irina Novakova, and I represent NATO. I'm here on the eve of a very important summit that will take place in Brussels next week of NATO leaders. And the fact that I'm here today shows how much importance NATO places on this topic and on this region. I just want to say a few words about how we at NATO tackle this problem. I will make it very practical in the hope that some of these ideas can be useful in this research and also in our work as practitioners. Basically, of course, NATO has a lot of interest in dealing with the problem of disinformation because we see it as weaponization of information and as part of hybrid war. So we want to leave we want to make it clear that for us this is not about just about propaganda or about attempting to influence. It's a very well organized, concerted effort which has concrete aims, and these aims are to confuse, not to convince, to deepen divides, to undermine trust, and to prevent action. And I think that some of the presentations that we heard already are good examples of how this is being done. At NATO, we have been thinking about the problem for a long time. We have been talking about it, but we have also been acting. And I think that the time for wondering what we are seeing is over, and we all should go to the more practical stage of action, and I think that we heard some very good ideas of how we can do that. So what do we do? Our approach is very simply called the 2 A's and the 3 C's. The 2 A's are awareness and analysis, and the 3 C's are counter-messaging, communicating with confidence, and coordination. So on awareness and analysis, we monitor the news cycle 24/7. We analyze what we see, and we track the narratives, the tactics, and the targets of hostile information activities against us across the media spectrum. We try to assess the trends, and we also rely on partners such as our colleagues in the NATO Center of Excellence on Strategic Communications. This leads to recommendations on how we need to adjust our messaging, because just seeing what the Russian narratives are or the hostile narratives are is probably academically interesting, but it doesn't help. So we need to act. So we adjust our messaging, and then this leads me to the second point of counter messaging. We at NATO do not counter propaganda with propaganda. We do it with facts based on our values that all of our allies share. We at the NATO Press Service are very busy. We handle more than 2,000 media queries every year. We see a 400% increase in our media engagements in recent years. We bring journalists to our headquarters. We engage with journalists, including with Russian journalists, because we think that, well, we are right, and those who do disinformation are wrong. And as part of our engagement with the media, we also engage with the Russian media. We are always prepared to explain who we are, what we are doing, and why. We are transparent, and we believe that at the end of the day, this will prevail. We have a very good product on the NATO website called Setting the Record Straight, which is a one-stop shop to debunk Russian myths against NATO. It includes stuff like satellite pictures, fact sheets, interviews, press conferences, etc. I would encourage you all to take a look. Maybe it will be something that some of these myths are something that you would recognize. Maybe there are some of the actual facts that you might be surprised what the reality is. And we are proud to say that this is something that facts are our method of operation. The main target of Russian disinformation is our unity, so we are always happy to engage and coordinate with others, because we believe that no one has the answer to how to solve this problem, and the only way that we can do that is through concerted action. That's why NATO works together with the European Union. We heard earlier Deputy Minister Panayotova mention that next week there will be another declaration at the highest level on NATO-EU cooperation, and fighting disinformation is one of the areas in which we cooperate with the European Union. And we are seeing how we can step up this coordination, especially with regards to the countries of the Western Balkans. We are also working closely with partner countries that are not members of NATO to help them confront disinformation. We did so with Montenegro quite actively before they joined the alliance, but we also do it with countries like Ukraine and Georgia. We are also helping our member states, but at the end of the day, it's not NATO and the EU that will single-handedly solve this problem. It's a problem that requires a united solution. I think that one thing that I can say at the end is that this is a serious problem, and we see how many various implications it can have. It's not only a Western Balkan problem, we see it happening everywhere. At the same time, we should be confident that we will prevail, because at the end of the day, we have the facts on our side. And at the end of the day, I don't know if you saw, there was this statistics from a public opinion poll in Russia the other day, saying that 1/3 of young Russians would like to emigrate, ideally to Germany. So I think that this should make us think about who will win at the end. Thank you.